Begin today the Gemara on the Tzadik Amud Beis, 5 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Itmer. The Gemara continues, halachas b'negei to the lav of leisachsein, not to muzzle an animal that's threshing the grain. Itmer, we learned the following, machlokes chasma b'koil. If a person is muzzling the animal, he didn't muzzle the animal physically, but he's yelling at the animal to prevent it from eating. Or v'enhiga b'koil. Or he has animals that are two different species that are together and it's klayim, and they're going to go and plow together, but he doesn't physically hold on to the goad, which is the steering wheel of when you take it into the field, but you're just yelling for it to go in the direction to do the work. Rabbi Yochanan says, chayiv. You chayiv malchus, even if it was just, you didn't do anything physical, it was just with your voice. Shlokish omar potter. But Shlokish says though that you're potter. Rabbi Yochanan says you chayiv in this case because akimas piv haba maisa. The movement of your lips, that's considered to be an action. So therefore you chayiv malchus for this. Shlokish omar potter. Shlokish says you potter because kala lo haba maisa. The voice of a person is not considered to be an action, and you only chayiv malchus for a lav sheyesh by maisa, only for a lav that you do a physical action. There's a Taisvis here that explains Rabbi Yochanan's opinion that says Akimas Fasav Hava Maisa. This brings from another place where you see that Rabbi Yochanan holds that you're not chayiv malchus unless there is a physical action, and even the movement of the lips is not enough to be considered a physical action. And Taisvis says that over here it's the fact that through your physical lips you're having an effect on the physical behavior of the animal. It's not just the movement of your physical lips, but because of this, you're preventing the animal of eating. So you're being guided a maisa through this, and therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says you'll be chayiv. There's an interesting sikha from the Rebbe on this in Chelik Yiral of Parshas Yisroi, where the Rebbe explains the difference between machshava and dibur. A person's machshava can't have a physical effect on a physical behavior of something in the world. Mashenkin dibur, because the dibur itself is more related to Gashmis, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan is saying is in his own words. Akimas piv hava maisa, that the dibur itself in the person is an aspect of what he does in his movement of his lips that's related to Gashmis. Therefore, it's able to also affect physically the behavior of the animal, and that's why you're going to be chayiv malchus for this. Eis for Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan asks on Reish Lakish. Mishnah says, Lo yisha adam rashay lahame. This is talking about the lav of Tumura. You're not allowed to take an animal that's kosher and say, I want to substitute this animal and exchange it that another one should become kosher. You're not allowed to be this meimer, substituting. Ella, but you're not allowed to do it. But she'im heimer, if you did substitute one for another, so then mumar, that second animal becomes also kaidesh, and also b'seifik arbon. The person gets malchus for doing this. It's a lav. You're not allowed to exchange or substitute one for another. So over here, we're also talking about something that a person is just doing verbally. And Taisus over here points out as well, this is verbally, but it has an effect on the kedusha of this physical animal itself. So Rabbi Yochanan says, here you see that such a kind of verbal expression that has this kind of effect, you get malchus. So this question on a shlokish that says you don't get malchus. Omalei, so shlokish answered, sorry, Homani Rabbi Yehuda. That Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, the Omar, Lav, She'em by Maise, Loikan Olav. Rabbi Yehuda holds b'chlal that it doesn't have to be a physical action to be chayiv malchus. Rabbi Yehuda learns out by Edom Zaymimin, or actually Rashi here brings that, the Gemara brings by Edom Zaymimin as well, but Rabbi Yehuda learns this out from the lav of Neisar, when a person leaves over from the karbonis. So over there the pasuk says, Anoisam meno ad baiker, so it's a lav hanitik la say that you burn it in fire afterwards, and therefore you're not chayiv malchus. But if not for the fact that the Torah would say you could burn it in fire, nicer, leaving over from the karbanis, you'd be chayiv malchus for it, even though there's no action. It's just a lack of action. You're leaving it over. And Rabbi Yehuda holds that from there you learn out that you chayiv malchus for any lav she'em by maisa. So that Mishnah there in Tumura is going according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The Gemara asks on that, how could you say that Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda? But Vakatani Reisha, in the beginning of the Mishnah it says, Hakoil memirin. Everybody could do this tmura. When you have an animal of kachim, the tmura, anybody could do this. Echad ahan noshim, men, ve'echad anoshim, and women as well. And the question there was asked, Hakoil lasuyamai. When the Mishnah is saying everybody has the ability to do tmura, who else is it coming to include that the Mishnah didn't say? And the answer is lasuye yoirish, a person that inherits an animal of kachim from his father. He wasn't the original owner that was makdish it. He inherited it from his father. He also has the power to transport or to take the kedusha from this animal and to exchange or to give over the kedusha to another animal. Oduloi Rabbi Yehuda, and that's not like Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, because the Rabbi Yehuda, if you would follow what Rabbi Yehuda holds, so Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Yoirish Eine Meimer. A person that inherits an animal with kedusha in it does not have the power to do tmura that the kedusha should go on another animal. Yeirish, Rabbi Yehuda holds Yeirish Eine Meimer, you can't do any tmura, and also Yeirish Eine Saimach. A person that gets an animal from his father, he doesn't do the smicha, the leaning of the animal before it's brought as a carbon. So you can't say that Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda if the beginning of the Mishnah is clearly not the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So for the Gemara says, we must say that Hai Tana, this Tana over there of that Mishnah, the first Mishnah in Masechta Tmura, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda in one detail, that Allah Shem Be'maisi get Malchus, and he argues on him on another detail regarding this, that a Yairish could do Tmura, not like Rabbi Yehuda. Tana Rabbanon, we learned in the Braise, another halacha, Chaisim is a part of a doshba, a person that muzzles the cow and he threshes with it. So loike u'mishalem. This person is going to get malchus for being over on the lav of leisachsa, and he also has to pay. Meaning, who does he have to pay? If he rented this cow from someone and he's threshing with it, so he's supposed to feed the animal. It's part of his responsibility to make sure when the animal is working, it should be able to eat. If you didn't give it to eat, you have to pay the owner that you rented the animal from that food that you prevented the animal from eating, which would be dalet kavon lepora. That yes, the shear is for a cow, it eats 4 calves. So you have to now pay the owner the 4 calves that you prevented it from eating, and we give him a kavon lechamoy, and 3 calves for a donkey. Now the Gemara asks on this: how could it be that you'd be chayiv malchus and also to pay the owner at the same time? The rule is, if a person's chayiv misa, which is a much harsher punishment, you don't get any punishment of payment. This is komle b'deravimine. And similar, if you're getting malchus, you don't have to pay any money. So how could you be over here? You get both. Abaya answers, there's actually an opinion that says that you do. This Bryce says Rav Meir's opinion, the Omar loike u'mishalem. Rav Meir says that you do get malchus, and at the same time you also be chayiv to pay. Here Rashi brings from the Gemara by Edom Zayman, if a person wanted to be mechayiv someone else to pay money, then it turns out that he said false testimony, so he's Edom Zayman, gets malchus for saying the false edus, l'sana b'riacha eid shoker, and at the same time though, kashuzama, you also have to pay the money that you intended to make him pay. So there Rav Meir holds Yechayiv loike mishalem. Here as well, there's the din of loike mishalem. That's one pshat for this brayse. Another pshat, Rava says that the pshat of this brayse is when it says that you have to pay. The pay doesn't mean that you're going to be chayiv in bezdin b'dei adam. The bezdin will force you to pay. What it means is that if you want to be yaitze b'dei shemayim, you should pay. And the Gemara brings an example for this. Esnan osna teire. Esnan, the Torah said, is not allowed to be brought as a carbon. What's a esnan? A esnan is a gift, or a gift that a person promises to give to a zaina that he's having a relation with her, and he says, I'm going to give you this animal as a gift in exchange. So that esnan that he gives is going to be also the Torah says it's also to be brought as a carbon. So now this isser of the esnan to be brought as a carbon, so the Torah asks it to be brought even in a case where the one that he had a relation with is his mother, where there's a isser and a chayev misa for this. So he's chayev misa. So you may think, if this person's chayev misa, does he now have to follow through with his agreement that he promised, that he's going to pay this gift for the aveda that he did? He's chayev misa, so he doesn't have to pay any money, even though he promised and he was obligated himself to pay this animal. So if he decides to give this animal anyways, he's not obligated to give it, so it's just a gift that he wants to give. You can't define it as a esnan. But the halacha is that if he gives this esnan, even though he's chayiv misa, this animal that he gave because of his agreement is considered to be esnan, and it's also to be brought as a carbon. Why? Because even though b'dei adam, he's not obligated to follow through with his agreement that he said he would give it, but lotzis yidei shamayim, when a person makes an agreement, he's still obligated to give it. And therefore this animal is still going to have the get that it's still defined as an esnan, that it's also to be brought as a carbon. So the Gemara here is bringing this as an example, that the same thing over here, when it says, loiko mishalim, it doesn't mean that b'dei adam, he's going to be chayiv both, malchus and to pay. It means that b'dei adam is going to be chayiv malchus. But if he wants to be yaitze b'dei shamayim, so then he should pay what he prevented from the animal of this person of eating. Third pshat the Gemara says, Rav Papa ma mishas mishiche echayev lebim zenesel. The chiyuv of the malchus and the money is coming at 2 different times. Because the moment he takes the animal from the person that he rented it from, that's when the obligation of him to feed the animal while it's working begins. And then but the time when the chi of malchus comes upon him is at the time when he's actually muzzling the animal. So therefore, this halach of kamle b'derabimine, whether regarding misa, whether regarding malchus, is only if the two obligations come simultaneously. But if one happens before, one happens after, so then you chayav for each one of them separately. Rav Papa said, this is going to be related actually to something the Gemara brought up before. As the Gemara was speaking about chsime, the Gemara also brought in the union of kilayim. So here the Gemara is going to speak about different halachas about kilayim. So Rav Papa said, these questions, the people in the house of Rav Papa Barabba asked me, and I pass into them both that it's prohibited, l'chumre, and one, I pass to them, this is the din, halacha, this is the ikar din. And the lav kehilchase, and one, what I passing for them, it's not the actual halacha, but I still was machma for them. And now the first shaila is not really related at all to animals at all in our sugya. So minoi, they asked of me, when you're kneading a dough, are you allowed to mix in milk as well in the ingredients? And I answered them that it's not allowed. And kehilchas, this is the halacha, the Tanya, as we learned in the Braisa, ein loshen esayisa b'cholav, you can't knead a dough with milk. Ve'im losh, and if you do need it, kol apas kula asura, you're not allowed to eat from this bread, mipnei hergel aveda, because it can bring a person to do an aveda. You're eating a piece of bread or challah, and it has milk mixed into the ingredients, and you don't know, and you can't eat it with meat. Kayetzuba is similar, the opposite. Ein toshen es hatana ba'alya. You're not allowed to apply on the walls of an oven the fats of an animal, of meat. And then you bake the bread inside, and then the bread is fleshig. You can come to eat it with milk. Vim tosh, if you did apply this fats of the animal on the oven, kol apas kula asura. The bread that you bake in it is going to be forbidden. Chiyasek is satana, until you heat up the oven and you burn out the fats of the animal on the walls of the oven. So that's one halacha he taught them and he answered them, which is la halacha. Ikar adin. But then they asked me another question. Are you allowed to bring two species of animals into the same barn to be together? So there's an issa of kalayim. So there's, besides issa of kalayim that the Gemara spoke about before, that you're not allowed to have two species of animals plow together, work together in the field. You're not allowed to also the issa of harba. You're not allowed to cohabit two different species of animals. So if that's the case, the question is he allowed to have them live together in the same barn? And I answered them that it's not allowed. And this is the lav kehilchase. And this is not a meikar adin, but nevertheless, I was machma, I told them that they shouldn't do this. It's not allowed. Now, he says, why is it the lav kehilchase? Because the Amar Shmuel said about the isser of kilayim, and here, again, we're talking about the isser of harba, cohabiting two species of animals, that ubimenafim achiyida kederech hamenafim. When you have people that are having a forbidden relationship, and you want to have if you want a testimony to testify about this, so it's enough that they see that they're acting like people that are having a relation together. Even if you don't physically see the act itself, you can rely on that testimony to be mechayev the misa. But by the isser of kalayim, what is the isser of the cohabitation of two species that the Torah says is not allowed? That's only if the person does the physical act with his own hands to place one animal and to cohabit these two animals, only then is it going to be aser. So therefore, Mikra Adin, for sure, to have the two minim living in the same barn would be allowed. But nevertheless, he was machmer with them. So most of Rav Achtavai Barami asks on this, that he says that the Isser is only if you did the physical act itself. There's a Braisa that says, Ilu nema behem tuchaloi sarbia. If the Torah would say that you're not allowed to cohabit animals, I would say what this means is that you shouldn't hold on to an animal, that it should remain in place and not run away when it's cohabiting with a zocher. That's what I think, that itself is not allowed, even if it's the same min, the same species. Talmud Loimar, so therefore the Torah says kalayim. The Isser is only if it's kalayim. Kalayim, you're not allowed to hold one animal to cohabit with a min that's not a different min. So now, what do we understand from this brayse? Lav. So can't we learn out from this brayse? Miklal, we understand from here the kalayim, when it's two different minim and it's kalayim, achize namiloi. The expression that the brayse says is holding the animal in place. So even just holding it, let's say holding it by its horns, that also would not be allowed. So before, Shmuel said that the Isser is only mamish physically the act itself. So the Gemara answer is no. My achize, when the Braise uses the expression of achize, hachnose, it means when a person puts in and cohabits the animals mamish physically with his hands. My karila achize, why does the animal use this expression of achize, holding the animal? Lishnama alya, it's a euphemism. The Braise is using a cleaner language. Rav Yehuda said, min b'minai, when you have two animals, the same min, mutter lahachnes k'mechal b'shveiferes, a person is allowed to cohabit the animals physically with his own hands, fila mishum pritzuse leke. And there's no issue of pritzis, this will bring a person to immoral thoughts, it's totally allowed. My time, what's the reason? Because ba'avidite taught it, the person is doing his work with the animals, he wants to give birth, to have more animals, so that's the person's involved in this, it's not a problem. So now here the Gemara says that Rav Achterboy asked on this from the same brisa that he just quoted before. Masav Rav Achterboy Barami. So again the brisa says, if the pasuk would simply say that you're not allowed to cohabit the animals, so you see I would say, you're not allowed to hold the animal by its horns in place that the zachar should then cohabit. So any animals, even if it's the same min. Talmud loymar kalayim. So the Torah says that this isser is only if it's kalayim. So what do I see from this brayse? Kalayim hu the aser. Like only kalayim is it aser, but ha min b'minoi. But if it's the same min shari, then it's allowed. Now, what's the language of the brayse? Umin b'minoi nami. Even when it's the same min, what does the brayse say? Achize in, holding it in place, that's allowed. But achnase loy, to mamish physically do the action of the cohabitation, that's not allowed. So again, the Gemara says, like it was answered before, loy, that's not how you have to understand the Braise. My achize, hachnose, the term achize used in the Braise means that you're doing the physical act itself. My korile achize, lishnamalya. The Braise is using a cleaner language. Omer Ravashi said, ha milse boy minoi, the Beir of Nechemye, Reish Galusa. This question, the people by the Rav Nechemye, the Reish Galusa, the head of the exile, asked me, so before we spoke about having two animals, two different minim live in the same barn. So how about if you're bringing in a zachar with an akeva that the same min, but there's also an akeva female which is not the same min in the same barn? Is that okay? So now, what's the question? Do I say because it's living in the barn with another animal which is the same min, so then it's going to cohabit with that min? The fact you're bringing in another min doesn't matter. Or perhaps I could say, nevertheless, you shouldn't bring another min, another female that's not the min of this zachar, because it still may cohabit with that animal. So Ravashi says, and I said to them that it's not allowed, and this is the loike hilchasa, even though this is not the halacha me'ikar adin, and the reason why I said it's not allowed is mishum pritzusa da'avdi, because I knew that the slaves that are working there in the Reish Galusa, they're not careful with these kinds of isurim, and therefore if you allow them to bring in another animal that's not the same min together with it in a barn, they may cohabit two animals that are not the same min. Okay, so the Heilige Mishnah, going back to the halachis of a poil that works, and while he's working, the Torah says that he can eat from the produce that he's working with. If he's only working with his hands, he's not using his feet in the work, or the opposite, beraglov, the work he does is just with his feet, but he's not active with his hands at all. Or or his work is just, let's say, carrying something on his shoulders, and he's not moving his hands or his feet, or it's just maybe he's standing there and he's just helping transport from one place to another, and it's going from his shoulder to someone else, but he's standing in one place, and it's just being his shoulder is just like a rest that is being placed on. Other people are doing the work. But he can also, he's a worker, and he can eat from the produce that he's working with. Rabbi Yehuda says, in order for him to be allowed to eat from the produce that he's working in the field with, he has to be active with his hands and his feet. So the Gemara, my time, what's the source of the Tanakama that says even if you're standing in one place and your shoulder is just being used as a place to put things on, that you're already a worker that can eat? Because the pasuk says, "Ki savai bekerem reyacha." You enter into your friend's vineyard. It's just a sava. You enter. Doesn't say anything about you working with your hands and your feet. B'chol my David. So from this I learn, no matter what it is that you're doing, even just standing there with your shoulders, the work is being done. You can eat as well. Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yehuda, that is, you could only eat if you're working with your hands and your feet. What's his source? My time that Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. So the answer is Kishay, because we compare this that a worker, a man, could eat like the ox that you're not allowed to muzzle him. The Gemara before brought that we compare the chaysim to the nechsam, we compare the two. So what do we learn out from the ox? The ox, when it's threshing, it walks with its forelegs and with its hind legs, which the Gemara calls hands and feet. So it's working with all four legs. So too a worker, only if he's active with his hands and his feet, is he allowed to eat from the produce. So Rabbi Baravona asked, based on Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, you have to work with hands and feet. If a person is threshing his tfuah with ducks or with geese, that is, and chickens, so they only have 2 feet. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, what's going to be the halacha? Do you have to let them eat as well? What's the suffix? Is the point there that they have to use all of their energy, and just like the animal uses all the feet it has. So here, the chicken, the geese are using the 2 feet it has. So therefore you have that. So you should be allowed to. You have to give them to eat. That it has to be specifically only if you're using an animal that has hands and feet, or a human being that has hands and feet. Then he eats. But by the geese and the chickens, that only has 2 feet. So therefore you don't have to let them eat. Teiku. This remains unresolved. The workers that are doing work in a vineyard. So these are the workers that are bringing the grapes from the vine. They're bringing it into the vineyard, into the press, that is, and they're pressing the grapes and making wine. So if they're doing only work with the grapes, they're allowed to eat some grapes. If they're actually doing work in the press, they're allowed to drink from the wine as well. So now these workers that are working in the press, until they didn't walk in the whole length and the width of the play area where the press is, they could eat from the grapes that they're delivering there, because they're considered to be workers of grapes. They can't drink from the wine. However, if they spent enough time there in the press and they walked in length and the width, so then they're delivering the grapes. They could eat from the grapes, and they could also drink from the wine that they're pressing there in the wine press. Additional halachas here regarding the workers eating while they work. If the work that he's doing is with figs, he shouldn't help himself to eat from the vineyard, from the grapes. If his work is being done with the grapes in the vineyard, he shouldn't eat figs from the fig tree. He could only eat from the min that you're working with. A worker could hold himself back of eating until he comes to the best quality fruits that he sees and eats from there. So he's allowed to take from the best quality. Now all this that it says that a worker is allowed to eat from the fruit that he's working with, it's only during the time of the work. That's what the Torah says he can eat. Aval mishum hashev aveda lebailam, but in order to return lost time, lost object, or in this case it's lost time, to the owner, Amru, the Chachamim said, Payel and Meichlin, that the workers are allowed to eat while they're walking from one row to another row, and they're not working, they're allowed to eat then. And or if they're delivering grapes from the vineyard to the press, so when they are walking from the press back to the vineyard, they can eat or drink then. And the reason is because if they're eating during the time when they're actually working, so then it takes off the time from their work, or their work is going to be done more in a lazy manner. So therefore Chachamim said that they can eat when they're going from one place to another when they're not mamish working. Now another halacha, ubechamoir kishihi peirekes. A donkey, you have to allow him to eat from the load that it's carrying when the load is being taken off from it. The Gemara will explain exactly what that means. The Shaila was asked about this mitzvah or this halacha that the Torah says that a worker can eat during his work. If he's doing work in one vine, is he allowed to eat from a different vine? Right, so the Mishnah spoke about a person that's doing a work in figs. He's not allowed to eat from the grapes, or the grapes from the figs. But if it's in one vine, is he allowed to eat from another? What's the suffix here? Do we say that it has to be from the same min, the same species that the balabas himself is eating from? It says, "Val kel yucha lo yisitein." You're not allowed to put it into your keli, meaning it's this min that the balabas is putting into his keli. That's the min that you're allowed to eat from. So therefore, that min you can eat now from any min of any vine, not only the vine you're working with. It's from these actual fruits or grapes that you're putting into the keli of the balabais that you can take and eat with your hands from it. But that's the only thing that is allowed. But so therefore, to go and eat from a different vine, even if it's the same min, it's not going to be allowed. Now the Gemara says, how could you even have such an ibaya? Because if you're going to say that we answer this ibaya to say that if you're working with one vine, you can't eat from grapes which is the vine right next over. So if so, shayr b'mechuber heichi achel. The halacha of a shayr. This is based on what the Gemara brought before regarding the ox that's allowed to eat also during the work. The Gemara before said that an ox is not only allowed to eat during threshing. The ox is also allowed to eat similar to a worker that eats when he's doing the harvest, when he's cutting and picking and plucking from the tree. The same thing also with a shirt. If a shirt is helping you pick from the tree, the shirt is also allowed to eat then. Now Rashi explains what's the Gemara's question. What does a shirt do? How do you use an ox for helping you to pick the fruits from the tree? The ox is not picking any fruits from the tree. But what you're doing is the ox is pulling a wagon in order for you to be able to pick the fruits from the tree and place them straight into the wagon. So the ox is already ahead and the wagon is there behind, right where the tree is. So if the ox is ahead, how is the ox eating from this tree? It must be that the ox is eating from another tree that's ahead of it. So you see that the ox can eat from the same min from another tree that's ahead of it. So the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. It could be that there's a branch from this very same tree that you're filling the wagon behind the ox, but there's a long branch that goes all the way to the front where the ox is, and it'll eat from a fruit from that tree. So Toshima, when it says, let's bring a raya to this shaila from what it said in our Mishnah here. The Mishnah says if you're doing work with figs, you're not allowed to eat from grapes. So what do you understand from this? But if it's two fig trees, similar to a fig tree and a vine, then you are allowed to eat from it. So this tells you that as long as it's the same min, you're allowed. If you're going to say that if you work with one vine, so the grapes from that vine you're allowed to eat, but the grapes from another vine you're not allowed to eat, so then how could this be this that we're saying that only if it's two different minim then you're not allowed to eat? But if it's two different trees similar to two different minim, that you are allowed. So you see that even if it's two different trees, you're allowed. Rav Sheshes says, no, we don't have a raya from here regarding two different minim, regarding the same min that are totally two different trees. Because what this Mishnah could be talking about is b'mudleis, when you have the two trees that are hanging one over the other. That's what we're talking about over here. So what the Mishnah is saying is, let's say you have a fig tree that's entangled in the branches of a vineyard. And this person is picking the figs. But in order for him to pick the figs, he has to separate it from the branches of the vine. Now over there, the Mishnah is saying, even though you're also doing work with the vine, taking out the branches of the vine, but because you're actually picking figs, you could only eat from the fig tree. And then from that you could be medayik from the Mishnah, but if you have two fig trees that are entangled in one another, and you're separating one branch from the other, and you're really picking fruits, the figs, only from one tree, in such a case, you'll be allowed to eat from the branches of the other fig tree that are entangled with this fig tree. That's what you can learn from the Mishnah. But if it would be two fig trees that are mamish completely separate in the road, they're near each other, but they're totally separated from each other, from that you don't have any dye from the Mishnah. That you can't eat. If you're busy picking the fruits from one fig tree, you can't eat from the fruits of another fig tree. Toshema, the Gemara says, let's bring a raya from what it says in the continuation of the Mishnah. That if a person sees in the rows of the trees or of the vineyard, and he sees where the best grapes are, he can hold himself back from eating from what he's doing now with the lesser quality, and he'll eat from the better quality. That's what the Mishnah says. Now the question is, if you're going to say that while I do work with one vine, I'm allowed to eat grapes from another vine, so why does he have to hold himself back until he gets there to do the work in that better quality vine? Nazel v'nesi v'nechel. While he's doing work with this vine, he can go and grab grapes from the other vine that's the better quality. Well, he doesn't have to wait. Answers the Gemara, no. Hasa mishum bittul malacha. What the Mishnah is saying is the reason you're not allowed to do this is because then you're going to have to stop the work you're doing. You're doing work on one vine and you're walking over to take grapes from a different vine. So you're stopping from your work. That's why it's not allowed. So like kami bayalan, that's not a shaila. You're not allowed to stop from work and go from one vine to another. Ki kami bayalan, the only time we had the shaila was if the person that's working there has his wife or one of his children that are there with him, and while he's working on one vine, he wants to ask his wife, hand me over some grapes of another better quality vine that's nearby. Over there is the shaila whether he'd be allowed to eat from those grapes. And that still remains a shaila. Says the Gemara Tashama, let's bring an eye from the continuation of the Mishnah. Mishnah says, "V'kulam layamru ela b'shas malacha." Minatayra, the time that the worker is allowed to eat is during the time when he's working during the work. Aval mipnei hashav aveda lebaylim, in order to return lost time for the owner. Amru Chachamim said, "Payel meichlim behiluchan me'aymen lo'aymen." The workers are allowed to eat when they're walking from one row to another row, and so in between, that's when they're not working, they'll have time to eat. Or minagas, when they're returning from the wine press to the vineyard to deliver more grapes to the wine press. So now the ones that wanted to bring a raya from this Mishnah to the shaila that we have, whether you're allowed to eat from when you're working with one vine, can you take the grapes of another vine? So they thought to say as follows: Mahalech ka'isa ma'isa. In that time when you're already walking to the next vine, the walking itself is already like you began to work with the next vine. If you're walking in that direction, so you're walking for the purpose of working there, it's like you began already working with the next vine. So therefore, what is the Mishnah saying? If you already you walked away from the previous vine, you're not working anymore on the previous vine. So what the Mishnah says is, this is something that Chachamim instituted and said, in order to give back the lost time to the owner, who the achel. Therefore, you're allowed to eat from the grapes of the previous vine that is, that you collected for yourself. But minatayre, you wouldn't be allowed to eat from that previous vine when you're working now with the next vine. You began walking to the next vine, so it's considered now from when you walked away from the previous one. You're walking to the new one. You're beginning to work with the next vine, so you're not allowed to take from the previous vine. So Alma, what do I see from here? If you're working with one vine, you're not allowed to eat from a different vine. So the Gemara, there's no rai from here. Really, I'll tell you, when you're working with one vine, you're allowed to take from the grapes of another vine since it's the same min. But over here, the reason why it says that minat Torah you're not allowed to eat is because when the person's walking, when he's in between, so he's not working at all. He stopped working with the previous vine. He didn't get yet to the next vine. So he's not working at all. Because he's not working at all, he shouldn't be allowed to eat any of these grapes. And that's what it's saying. The Chachamim said, you give back the lost time to the owner and you should eat then. That's one approach of how this raya over here went from this Mishnah. Others say that the raya from this Mishnah went in the opposite. Savrua, the ones that wanted to bring a raya from this Mishnah to the shaila we have, so they thought to say that mahalach lav kaisa ma'isa. In that time in between, when you're walking from one vine to another, it's like you're not working. You're not doing any action of work at that time. And behind the time, and that's the reason why the midayraisa loyachol, that minatayri, you're not allowed to eat from the vine that you're coming from. Because in between, when you're walking, you're not working at all. So if so, what do I understand from this? But if he's already doing an action in the next vine, he would be allowed to eat from the previous vine, from the grapes of the previous vine that he came from. If so, Alma, according to this version, what we're proving from here is, I see, if you're working with the next vine, you're still allowed to eat from the grapes of the previous vine. So on this we answer, you're doing work in one vine, you're not allowed to eat from the grapes of another vine. But over here, this person that's walking, it's like he's doing a maise, it's like he already began working with the next vine, so therefore he can't eat. Okay, so the Gemara does not resolve the siboy over here that it asked on the subject, it remains unresolved. Okay, going to the last point that the Mishnah said, let's just finish with the Mishnah here. Ubechamayr, when it comes to a donkey that's carrying a load on it, it can eat from the load when it's taken off from it. So the Gemara asks, once you take off the load, from where is it eating? If you take off the load, you take off the entire load all at once, and now the animal is not working, it doesn't have any load on it, why should it be allowed to eat from it then? So the Gemara says, so rather say and read the Mishnah as follows. While the animal is carrying a load, it's allowed to eat from that load that it has in it while it's on the animal until you remove the load. And that this is a proof to what it said also in a Braise, a donkey or a camel that is, that are carrying a load, they can eat from a load that's on them. However, you're not allowed to take from that load and give them to eat from it. If somehow this load is in a position that the animal itself will be able to eat from it, you have to let the animal eat from it. But the person himself that hired this animal to carry the load on it is not allowed to take from the load and feed the animal directly.